Another edition of Beat the Closing Number presented by TheLines.com. You can follow us on X at TheLines US. You can follow Mo, my co-host, at Mo Nuwwarah, 2 W's. You can follow me at Eli Herskovich, breaking down NFL Week 18 spreads and totals before we're joined by Adam Rittenberg from ESPN.com, senior college football writer, to preview the national championship game between Michigan and Washington. Two great semifinal games on Monday night. But before we get into it, remember to give the video a thumbs up and ring the bell to get notifications whenever The Lines releases a new sports betting video on any market, including the NFL, like this one, Beat the Closing Number. Obviously, Matt, Steven, and Adam do a great job on their NFL podcast, a part of TheLines.com. And we have our college football podcast, too, even though we're doing a bit of a national title game preview with Adam Rittenberg. Brett and Kelly Ford do a fantastic job on the Lines Podcast Network. You can also subscribe, rate, and review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your favorite podcast. But more importantly, we are 39-22 with spreads and totals so far in the 2023 NFL season. 2-2 last week. And Mo, how was your week 17? How was your podcast with Steven on Monday, since I've been out of town the last couple weeks?
It was good, and then both were good. I think we had we just fired from the hip. Had to just ad-lib basically the whole thing, and I think it was entertaining and went well. So I think that's appropriate in Week 18, man. Week 18 is weird, so it's less of like, okay, this is what I'm looking at this week with this matchup, and more of like, okay, everyone thinks this team is not trying, so let's just fire them pretty much.
And just to back that up a little bit, I wrote about this in my NFL betting column over at TheLines.com. Eliminated teams versus teams that are aiming for a win over the final 2 weeks of the regular season to get a playoff berth or improve their postseason positioning. The eliminated teams have gone 99, 64, and 4 against the number since 1990. So that's a 60.7% clip. Pretty solid, right? And again, it backs up your point about motivation versus the pressure on teams when you're trying to get a playoff berth.
Yeah, I mean, is there times where people are just Cancun and just mail it in? Yeah, of course. But for the most part, you know, these guys are playing for their next contract. They're going out there playing hard, right? I think if anything, honestly, you might be seeing less motivation on like the preparation end of things, coaching staffs, maybe more vanilla game plans, stuff like that here and there with, you know, lame duck staffs, whatever it might be. But sometimes the players play really extra hard in those spots because they just want to send those guys out with a win when everyone knows the writing is on the wall. So you can't always bank on that.
Right. You're playing for contracts too. You're playing for your next team if you're not under contract. So a lot still on the line, even if it's not a playoff spot. And to that point, if there are inflated point spreads, and we'll get into those here in a bit, there could be some inflated player props too. I know one Twitter user was posting a few of them, like DeAndre Hopkins needs 49 yards, for instance, to get $1 million bonus, 7 catches for $250,000. But that's going to be baked into a lot of these player prop markets, whether it's receiving yard totals or whatever it may be. And I don't see a lot of player props posted yet at most of the legal sports books. So just keep that in mind when you're searching for player incentive stuff. A lot of it, most of it, if not all of it, is already priced into the betting market. But Mo, let's get into our NFL Week 18 bets without further ado. And if you've yet to bet over at BetMGM Sportsbook, and you want to tail or fade our bets, whichever you prefer, you could do so at BetMGM. Use promo code TheLines, one word, to get up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet loses. That's the Lines, one word. Remember that bonus bets are not equivalent to real money. And like I mentioned, some of those inflated numbers that we could be seeing or did see earlier in the week: the Steelers at the Ravens, the Jags at Titans, Bucks at Panthers, Packers. We'll talk about Green Bay against Chicago, and Seattle against Arizona. I know, Mo, you don't have a bet, at least for the podcast, on Seahawks Cardinals, but you either may or already do have one in our Discord channel. And the link is over for that in thelines.com if you want to get all of our Week 18 bets in real time, you could subscribe in the roll section over in the Lines Discord. But let's start off with Sunday Night Football, Mo, as I break down Bills at Dolphins. Buffalo holding steady as around a 3-point road favorite in the de facto AFC East title game, total of 49.5. I bet the under 50 for this game on Wednesday, which you can find in our Discord channel. I know, Mo, you and Steven maybe got a little bit better of a number. I think Steven got 50.5 towards the under. So Buffalo ranks number 3 in EPA per play since the bye, or overall this season, but since the bye week, when you look at this passing offense and Josh Allen in particular, who's dealing with a neck injury, so that can hinder his efficiency or his overall performance. Buffalo's passing offense since the bye week in week 13, 23rd in passing success rate and 15th in dropback EPA per play. So there's kind of this idea out there, presumption that the Bills offense has greatly improved under Joe Brady, and the rushing attack has, when you look at how they've relied on their ground game juxtaposed to what they did previous to Joe Brady as their offensive coordinator. I think it's dipped nearly 7 percentage points in terms of the first half pass rate versus under their old offensive coordinator versus what it is right now. Think holding steady at around 53% in terms of their first half passing percentage under Joe Brady versus the way it was under Ken Dorsey. And when you think about running the football, you think about grinding clock. The Bills rank 22nd in the NFL in adjusted pace, which obviously plays towards the under. Miami ranks 27th in adjusted pace. So they try to go even slower. And I know typically Miami's offense is known for explosive plays with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Waddle could miss this game. We'll see if he practices on Thursday or Friday. Tua did practice in full on Wednesday, but he's dealing with that shoulder injury. Got banged up late against Baltimore. Mostert also hurt. And then Armstead, one of the best left tackles in the NFL, also banged up, and he missed practice on Wednesday. So it could be a big day for the Dolphins' quote-unquote backup running back in Achane, the rookie, against Bills' run defense that's allowing the 11th most EPA per carry, obviously correlating to the under, too. And keep in mind, the Bills' passing defense has been borderline elite since they got Rasul Douglas from Green Bay, number 2 in EPA per dropback allowed since their bye week. So I really like the under when it comes to the potential tempo on both sides for both offenses and the injuries, especially with both quarterbacks. But Mo, any take on the total? I think you fired the under, but what number do you like it down to, I guess? I would bet it down to 49.
Yeah, I think maybe you could even go a little lower to like 48.5 here. I did fire the under, like you said. This Bills offense, it's just been stuck in the mud. I mean, they haven't looked good passing the ball since they played the Eagles 6 weeks ago. So, and we know what the Eagles passing defense has been doing recently. So that's not exactly a spot where you're very impressed with a big game, I guess is what I'm getting at. So I don't know if Stephon Diggs has like hit a wall or what's going on there, but he hasn't had a big game in like multiple months. I just don't see this being an exciting offense unless he gets going again. I mean, this team looks like the Chiefs at this point, pretty much. Like winning with defense, grinding clock, getting first downs. Like this is not a 50 total team at this point. And the Dolphins, they are about average stopping the run, and they do have the number 1 pressure rate. So they're going to provide some resistance here. This is just basically Vic Fangio to me working his magic. I was never that impressed with the defensive personnel here, but it does seem to be working. I guess the question here in this game is just, what do the Dolphins have left personnel-wise? How can they get pressure against the Bills, or is that just gone? With no more Bradley Chubb, no more Jalen Phillips, like they're just losing all their pass rushers. So I'm a little bit concerned about the injuries. Xavier Howard, I don't think matters too much. I mean, he's pretty much washed at this point, I think. So wouldn't be too worried about that. But man, I just, on the other side, we've also seen Miami. I mean, how many times versus opponents with a pulse, this offense just looks pretty ordinary. Again, last week. And now, like you said, maybe without Jalen Waddle, you said, but I would be surprised if he played. I mean, seemed like he's going to be missing some time. So, Yeah, Buffalo, I think Steven pointed out, number one in rushing rate past 3 weeks, and it's by a mile. Both teams, even honestly, on the whole season, they're both above the median in rushing percentage. So, yeah, I really like this under. I was very surprised to see a number north of 50 here. I think this is just like, this is the number we would have seen in September when these offenses were throwing deep all the time, rolling, nice weather. I mean, should still be good conditions, obviously, but I just don't think it fits where these teams are playing right now.
Yeah, we saw them combine for nearly 70 points. And you mentioned your Chiefs. All I'm going to say is, I'm sorry for what you have to deal with Patrick Mahomes. Finally, the Chiefs are undergoing some issues offensively. And maybe Travis Kelce retires. We'll see. And goes off into the sunset with Taylor Swift. But on to another AFC game. Jags at Titans. Jacksonville down to a 3.5, 4-point road favorite. It's down from where it was earlier in the week at 5.5. We mentioned some of these inflated lines, at least Sunday night, Monday. This was certainly one of them. Total of 39.5, 40. Mo, I know which way you're looking, so explain why you like the home underdog.
Yeah, this is a weird one because like when we talked about this morning and I said I wanted to talk about it, the line was 5.5. So I think it's got hammered this morning. It's down to like 3.5, 4, depending on where you're looking. I still think it's playable even after the steam. Honestly, anything better than 3, I think is fine, but it's starting to get a little bit thinner for sure. Just a really high motivation spot for the Titans, man. I mean, people just want to believe that this is just a dead team playing a live team, but this Titans team, they know the Jags ended their season last year in a extremely, highly charged game there, and a close game. They've had this game circled for months. They don't care that they're out of it. And the public just loves to smash the other side of these games. But I am not convinced that the Jaguars are. I think so I tried to fade the Jags last week, and I think maybe the fact that they were able to come out and just blank the Panthers is creating kind of a false sense of security, I guess is not the right word, but a false sense that the Jaguars are just fine. And I still don't think they are. They still can't run the ball. Yeah, they still can't run the ball. I mean, this team hasn't been able to run the ball all year. Even last week, ETN rips off that long touchdown. Outside of that one, they had 2.7 yards per attempt from their running backs. And this is not just you can take away the best play they had, and of course it's going to look different. But this is how they've looked all year running the ball. They cannot block. And that means it's all on this passing offense. And when was the last time this passing offense looked good? Similar to what I was saying about the Bills, it's been a long time. I was checking back. I think it's been basically since the Bengals game early December. That was the last time they had a nice, really good, efficient game that wasn't basically the product of, some garbage time, which is pretty much when they were scoring on the Browns. Only thing here is that Christian Kirk did get activated off IR, but it's still his first week being eligible. And I think for the most part, we've seen players that do get activated don't play. So I'm still expecting him to be an underdog to play. But that being said, obviously this is a spot where they would push it if it's close. So we'll see how that shakes out. But with Kirk and with Zay back practicing limited, maybe this is going to be fine again. I'm still skeptical once again. I mean, Zay, we saw him before. It took multiple weeks of practices before he returned from his last injury. And the guy throwing him the ball isn't exactly the healthiest himself. Obviously he missed last week, but multiple injuries, shoulder injury, ankle injury. I feel very unlikely he's 100% in this game. And I just really like the Titans, but it's definitely starting to get where it's not as exciting. I thought 5.5 was crazy. I would still bet this now, though, and I am going to take some 4s, I think, today.
Right. There are still 4s available. 3.5, 4. You can price shop over at thelines.com. You heard it in Mike Vrabel's press conference earlier in the week. There's going to be no shortage of motivation for Tennessee, even if it is his last game as the Titans coach. You mentioned Lawrence, or at least Kirk and Zay Jones limited in practice. Lawrence limited as well, but he's obviously going to be a full go, and a ton of pressure on him, literally and figuratively, because like you hit on too, Jacksonville dead last since week 13 in rushing success rate. And you also brought up a really good point going back to the Panthers game, and we'll get to Carolina in a second. But the Panthers didn't have a place kicker from the get-go. Eddie Pinheiro was hurt in warmups, and Carolina had a shot to get a field goal on their first or second offensive possession, which would have tied the game and kind of changed the narrative and the script of that game completely. I know Bryce Young struggled, but still something to keep in mind. Jags secondary is getting healthier, though. Andre Sisco and Tyson Campbell played the majority of the snaps last week, I believe, and Jacksonville top 12 in pressure rate against a very, very below average Tennessee offensive line. So if the Titans and Will Levis get into a negative game script, it could be an issue. But let's move on to the aforementioned Carolina Panthers. Bucks at Carolina. Tampa Bay, 4.5-point road favorite. It's down from where it was, at least on Monday. I got Carolina at 6, and it did open at Panthers minus 5.5. Total anywhere between 37 and 37.5. So another big motivational spot here, obviously for Tampa Bay with a postseason berth and an NFC South championship on the line. But Carolina, everything on the line for their interim coach, Chris Tabor. And they played well under Tabor, too. In 2 of their last 3 games, they've covered. And there's no draft stock gained if the Panthers were to, quote-unquote, tank, which Cardinals maybe. If you look at that Seahawks-Cardinals game, Arizona could get better draft position if they lose outright, depending on whether you buy into that notion or not. But Carolina gains nothing. They're giving away their first-round pick, the first overall pick, to the Bears, who we'll touch on, and Bears-Packers in a bit. But Baker Mayfield limited in Thursday's practice with that rib injury. It seems like he could make all the throws. At least that's what's being reported, but I don't necessarily buy it. And this offensive line, too, outside of Tristan Wirfs, their left tackle and one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL, 22nd in pass block win rate in the Panthers blitz at the 9th highest clip in the league. And Tampa Bay's skill position players, especially Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, if he's healthy, have an advantage against these Panthers cornerbacks, especially if JC Horn doesn't go. But lack of mobility and just lack of comfort for Mayfield outside of the pocket, especially against pressure, I think is going to be a major concern for the Bucs offense. We saw it, heck, last week against the Saints. And then on the flip side of the ball, the Bucs are still banged up. Carlton Davis has yet to clear concussion protocol. He missed that Saints game, blowout loss to New Orleans, even though the final score may have made it seem otherwise. If Zion McCollum is on the field for Carlton Davis at a similar clip as we saw last week against New Orleans, he was picked on a ton by Derek Carr. So a lot of concerns for the Bucs secondary if Davis is even limited. So I really like the Panthers in a spot where you're trying to deter your division rival from getting into the playoffs like the Bucs did to Carolina last year. And Tampa Bay's secondary overall, keep in mind, when you exclude takeaways, the Bucs defense ranks 20th in the NFL in EPA per dropback allowed. So Bryce Young has been inconsistent, to say the least, like I hit on against Jacksonville. But he picked apart Joe Barry's zone defense a couple weeks ago. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's able to have some semblance of success against Tampa Bay, especially if Davis is out, and Shaq Barrett, for that matter, the Bucs' best pass rusher. But what say you, Mo, on Bucs Panthers?
Yeah, I like the Panthers too. I'm sad I didn't get 6, but I still think it's playable at 4.5. This is another one that's getting close to where I'm getting pretty indifferent, though. I do still lean Panthers rather, and I think I'll play it at 4.5. Yeah, you kind of touched on this with your Saints play last week, but it's a good time to fade the Bucs basically after their semi-fake 4-game win streak. I mean, they got outplayed big by the Falcons. The Jags were an injury-riddled disaster, and then one of those games was against the Panthers at home. I mean, they legitimately creamed Green Bay, but outside of that, it hasn't really been that impressive. And this is a spot where Bryce Young could look like a real NFL quarterback again. I mean, Tampa Bay doesn't get a lot of pressure on the quarterback, 26th in pressure rate coming into last week. It just comes down to prepping for these Todd Bowles blitzes. If they can hold off those blitzes, then I think Bryce Young is going to be fine here. So it's just on the coaching staff basically to get ready and do that, because Bryce Young his reaction to pressure is atrocious. I mean, he still thinks he can run away from guys like in college. It's like, dude, these guys are about 0.3 of a second faster in a 40-yard dash, bud. Like, you're not getting away from them anymore. once they've like closed space to you, it's basically over. You got to throw it away. But yeah, as long as he's not constantly under pressure, because that's pretty much what happened in that Jags game. Bye-bye to my 3 points of CLV. Other than that, like I think, he is going to be fine, and he has been playing better. So yeah, I like the Panthers here. Like you said, there's just absolutely no motivation to tank here whatsoever.
And on to the final game, we mentioned a few divisions on the line with the AFC East, Buffalo and Miami, Jacksonville trying to win the AFC South in consecutive years against the Titans, and then Bucs and Panthers, the NFC South title on the line. Huge game too with Saints and Falcons if Tampa Bay does lose outright, which I think there's a very, at least in terms of the applied probability where the market was at earlier in the week. We mentioned the spread. I thought the money line too may seem obvious, but was inflated in that regard. I think Carolina has a real shot to pull off the outright upset. But now it's time to break down our final bet before we're joined by Adam Rittenberg to break down Michigan and Washington. Great analysis coming. But Bears and Packers, Green Bay holding steady as a 3-point home favorite at Lambeau. It's down from 3.5. Pretty quick movement on that number, but still was an opener on Sunday night. Total of 44. Mo, this Bears defense has gotten a ton of love, and rightfully so, even if you exclude takeaways. And it was the opposite for Tampa Bay when you look at their defensive production when they don't force turnovers. But even when you exclude takeaways, the Bears rank 4th in EPA per play since week 9, which correlates and goes back to when they got Montez Sweat ahead of the trade deadline. But I know the Bears fans and bettors, the market has loved Chicago since that juncture when they got Sweat. Justin Fields has been a topic of conversation because do the Bears go with a quarterback at number 1 overall or with one of their 2 first-round picks, top 10 picks in the 2024 NFL draft? But if you look at their offensive production and efficiency since week 11, 20th in EPA per play, 24th in success rate, 24th in yards per play, 20th in touchdown drive rate, and then Justin Fields individually, 31st since week 11 in yards per attempt at 6.3 yards per attempt with a 75.6% adjusted completion percentage. And the Packers are getting healthier defensively, mind you. So I get it. This number may be a little bit inflated just because the Packers are fighting for a playoff spot and the Bears are trying to get revenge after that week 1 blowout loss to Green Bay. But which side do you lean on here? Because I was initially thinking Chicago, but I think the market, while the number may be a little bit inflated, I think the market also may be giving the Bears too much credit, especially on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I could see that for sure, especially with people are excited about Fields. I think it's somewhat rightfully so. He's performing pretty well. But I think at the end of the day, the offense has just been fine. But fine is good when you have a very strong defense, right? You're still a good team at that point. And I still think this number is too high. It's crazy because the Bears they've covered literally 6 straight weeks. And I think every single week since Fields came back, they've covered. So clearly the market is not underestimating or not properly rating this team. I think that might finally be at an end. But I think they might be giving the Packers too much credit, man. The +3s are starting to fade. You might have to hurry if you want that number. I feel like everything was -115 or higher other than I think maybe BetMGM. So that was the last flat 3 I saw earlier. I'm a little bit surprised. I felt like people were going to like the Packers here because of the motivational angle, like you were saying. But maybe people are starting to learn their lesson. We saw this exact same game last year. Packers at home against divisional opponent. They get smacked by the Lions when nobody pretty much thought that they would, except I definitely love the Lions. So I'm back on it again here.
I remember that.
Yeah, I think the Bears are just a solid team. I rank them ahead of the Packers multiple weeks in a row now, including this one, I think, on my power ranking. I think the Packers are coming off a win that people want to be excited about on national TV where Jordan Love played good. But, now they're playing a real defense and a professional quarterback, which is a major difference from last week. Not saying anything bad about the Vikes defense. They've been very good, but definitely not a professional quarterback that they faced. And then it just, a lot of it, this is kind of similar to the Jags game in the sense of a lot could hinge on these injuries to the receivers. Who is going to come back? Who is going to play? You have Jaden Reed, who has probably been overall the best weapon of any sort that the Packers have this year. I mean, Aaron Jones was a ghost for a lot of the season. He's been just, I mean, his stuff after the catch, and even like in the running game when they work him in on the sweep stuff, has been just outstanding. I'm skeptical he's going to play after he left the last game injured. He, I believe, did get a limited practice in. And then you have Christian Watson. I think the same, but yeah, I'm a little skeptical he's going to play too. And we saw last time when he struggled with injuries the entire season. But then on the other side, you have Jalen Johnson. I don't think he's going to play, just because, you know, it's a dead season, obviously, for the Bears. And he's not going to want to push it when he wants his next contract. Like, he's already put in a great season. He doesn't need to go out there and prove anything. I don't expect him to go, but so if the Packers receivers go and Johnson doesn't, this could kind of look a little bit ugly. But you still have a Chicago rushing offense that's very, very strong against a Packers defense that has just been atrocious at all levels basically this season. I still think this line shouldn't be 3. I think it should be 2, 2.5. So I still think a little bit of value on the Bears.
And this line, just in terms of the number itself, is kind of similar to me, the way I look at it, at least per my model, with Falcons and Saints, because I make that around Saints -2-ish, a little above 2.5. I make Packers a little lower, around 2.2, 2.3 home favorites. So when you take that into account, there's no real value for me, at least in backing Chicago. I get all of your points make a ton of sense. I just can't get to the window because of the number itself. But also with the Bears schedule, and you touched on this with their rushing attack, if they get into a negative game script, though, like you look at this stretch since week 9, Saints, Panthers, Lions, Vikings, bye week, Lions, Browns, Cardinals, Falcons, all of those games were positive scripts, or at least situation neutral. Falcons last week, they missed 2 field goals. Then the turnovers start to pile up for Atlanta's offense. And speaking of the Falcons, by the way, I do want to wrap with this, at least in terms of our game breakdowns. Taylor Heineke dealing with the ankle injury, and Saints also trying to get revenge on top of the fact they're trying to sneak into the playoffs, whether it's through the NFC South title, if the Bucs lose, or a wild card spot, because they got screwed in that first game when Brad Allen, who screwed over the Lions against the Cowboys with the Taylor Decker 2-point conversion, missed an obvious pass interference call that should have gone against Atlanta, against Alvin Kamara, who is on a route. So we'll see if Kamara plays, but Saints, Panthers, moneyline parlay, or even Falcons Panthers moneyline parlay is an interesting option if you like anyone but the Bucs to win that division. So therefore, Atlanta or New Orleans. Any thoughts, reason to bet a moneyline NFC South moneyline parlay, or am I crazy?
I like the Falcons too, actually. So I'm with you that the line should be south of 3. I was very surprised there was 3.5s on the board earlier in the week. That seems crazy. Those are gone now. I still think 3 is fine for the Falcons, though. I don't view this team as much different than the Saints, like you basically suggested with your 2-point, whatever line. And this team has just been a yo-yo team. Same as the Saints, and Steven and I discussed that, but especially the Saints. I think when you look at basically every time they had a good performance this week, they came out and just took a dump on the field the next week. I mean, it was like every single time this year. Like, you just can't count on any consistency from that team. So I do think the Falcons are going to make a game of this. And yeah, they're obviously still having their own hopes to win the division as well. So ton of motivation on both sides, but I just don't see a lot of difference between those two teams.
But with that said, you have to keep in mind, Heineke, if I had to guess, I would assume he plays. But if he doesn't, then you have Desmond Ridder, who is a turnover machine, and then some. And then the other variable for me, do the Falcons quit on Arthur Smith? I know you're fighting for a playoff spot, so on the surface, you wouldn't expect them to. A lot of pride for these players. Onyemata also should be healthier than he was going back to last week or the last couple weeks. Obviously improves the Falcons' defensive front. Then again, both of these defenses are probably fraudulent overall when you consider that they face the two weakest schedules in the NFL. One of the worst, if not the worst division in football. I'm not going to bet this game. 3.5 if I could have snagged that with Atlanta. Probably would have been a bet for me, but stay away from me at this number. Now it's time to be joined by the great Adam Rittenberg at ESPN Rittenberg, senior college football writer for ESPN, also a host at Sirius XM College Sports Radio. Breaking down the national championship, Michigan and Washington on Monday night. The Wolverines, a 4.5-point favorite in that one. But Adam, how's it been after covering two of the best, arguably, at least in the limited college football playoff that we've had over the last 6 or so years? Those were two fantastic games on Monday night.
Yeah, they were, Eli. I mean, really the last two sets of semifinals have been compelling in different ways. Last year you had higher scoring games with Michigan and TCU, and then certainly the Ohio State-Georgia game may have been the best of the recent bunch. But both those games in different ways on Monday night were outstanding. Two great finishes. Michigan obviously coming back to force overtime, and then Washington really outplayed Texas, but then found itself having to make kind of a red zone stand there at the end to secure victory. So two semifinals that didn't disappoint, and hopefully we'll get the same thing in the national title game with Michigan and Washington.
Yeah, speaking of Washington, obviously getting a lot of mileage out of their deep passing game. So just wanted to hop into the analysis here and see what you thought about that matchup, because I was really impressed with Michigan's DBs. Every time Bama tried to take a deep shot, basically running step for step with these receivers. So how do you see that matchup playing out with Michael Penix after his huge game and these Washington receivers who really do a lot of their damage down the field?
Yeah, I think this is the best receiving core in the country collectively when they're healthy. Rome Odunze is the number one, but then you have Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan. McMillan was out for a chunk of the season, but both of those guys would be number one receivers on a lot of teams. And so I think it's going to be a real challenge for Michigan to contain them. I thought that if Texas couldn't affect Michael Penix with their defensive line, their pass rush, that he would be able to attack a vulnerable Texas secondary, and he was able to do that. Now, to your point, Michigan is better in the back end. They have a number of guys who are playing at a higher level. Today I did MVPs for every top 25 team, and Mike Sainristil was my MVP pick for Michigan. Leads the team with 5 interceptions, 6 pass breakups, 2 forced fumbles, but a number of guys are playing well in the back end. Rod Moore has had some big moments. Will Johnson is an elite talent there. There's others. So it's going to be a bigger, probably a harder deal for Michael Penix to, attack as easily as he did against Texas. But Michigan also hasn't necessarily seen a receiving core all year that's as talented as Washington's. Ohio State would be the closest thing, and they did a pretty good job against that group.
Yeah, and speaking of the explosive passing plays that Washington had on Monday night against the Longhorns, do you think there's any reality to the notion that the artificial turf at NRG Stadium could impact the amount of explosive plays we see on both sides? For Michigan's rushing attack, maybe a little bit less, but for Washington in particular in the passing game.
Well, yeah, it's a game where there's really no effect to the conditions. So there's no, cold weather or inclement weather or a wet field. Those things can obviously hurt a team that relies so heavily on the passing game and on its offense. And so, certainly that favors Washington to a degree, but Michigan's played 2 games in a row now with the Rose Bowl and then the Big Ten championship game that really haven't been affected at all by the conditions. So, they're used to this as well. They are very, very talented and well coached on the defensive side of the ball. And it'll be interesting to see if they can, again, affect Michael Penix and ultimately force some mistakes from him, because that's what Texas really didn't do. They weren't able to get him on the ground. They weren't able to intercept any passes. There weren't even very many ill-advised throws. So, when he is not, he came to Washington in large part, guys, because of the offensive line and their offensive structure, and really was not hit at all last year. And this year it's been a little bit of a mixed, and he's dealt with some injuries as well. But he is healthy and performing at a high level. And so it's really incumbent upon Michigan to find a way to get to him and disrupt that passing game, because I don't care how good you are in the back end. If Rome Odunze and Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan are all running free, for a whole game, they're gonna be able to make their plays down the field.
So flipping to the other side of the ball, you have a record-setting running back, obviously, Blake Corum with Michigan, facing off against a Washington defense that it seemed like allowed a lot of chunk rushing plays to Texas, like multiple 8-yard plus runs, even though I didn't even watch like that whole game, but just the parts I watched seemed like they were ripping off a lot of long runs. On the other hand, like, obviously Michigan's offense did look stuck in the mud for a lot of that Bama game. And I don't know, do you think like there's something systemic about Michigan in these like college football playoff games against tougher competition outside of the Big Ten? Because the Big Ten plays defense though. So I was like really surprised how much they struggled at times against Bama. And what do you basically expect from the Michigan offense?
Yeah. Again, I couldn't hear the full question, but I think you were talking about, the difficulty of Michigan to sort of translate its success to the college football playoff on offense. And, there have been times where, not so much maybe last year against TCU, which is just a wild game with, pick sixes, and there was back and forth, and Michigan's defense really played poorly, I thought. It wasn't really the offense's issue, but both against Georgia and then for a good chunk in the Alabama game, Michigan's offense completely went away in the third quarter. And so that's going to be hard against a Washington team that I think has a higher ceiling offensively and at quarterback than does Alabama. Now, they did a great job against Jalen Miller, as you mentioned, only 5 yards per completion, didn't attack downfield like we're used to. I mean, the long pass was 29 yards to Isaiah Bond, and no other player had a completion longer than 13 yards. That's a really good template if they're able to replicate it. But I do think Michigan's going to have to make downfield plays on offense to win this game. And that hasn't really been their forte, even though they were able to create a few explosives in the Rose Bowl. Certainly the touchdown to Tyler Morris, 38-yard touchdown. Blake Corum and Roman Wilson also had plays over 25 yards. But I think they're going to need a few of those against this Washington team just because of how deep and explosive they are on offense.
Yeah, and all the points that Michigan left on the board, you alluded to it with the TCU game last year, where that was turnover variance. Wolverines obviously had a ton of special teams variance against Alabama. So maybe we see variance get wiped off, or at least return in a positive direction for the Wolverines offensively or on special teams on Monday night. But obviously, Adam, you don't bet, but the people would love a pick from you. Maybe you think it's a Michigan blowout. Maybe you think Washington keeps this game close, or it's a lower scoring game. What's the expectation for you on the scoreboard?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really tight game. Again, two teams that haven't been on the national championship stage, at least in this format. I think both teams want to control the clock. So that's one thing that's interesting, is it could be a low possession type game. So you're going to have to be really efficient when you have the opportunity to score points. I've gone back and forth about who's going to win. I mean, my lean is Michigan just because they have a little bit more experience, but the way that Michael Penix performed against Texas and the confidence that Washington's playing with, coupled with the fact that Michigan really hasn't seen too many offenses like that all year, I could certainly make the case for Washington. And even though Jim Harbaugh is maybe a more accomplished coach on the big stage, Kalen DeBoer at Washington does not lose big games. He's undefeated against ranked opponents. He's won national championships at the NAIA level. And so he's got a really good ability to get his teams as prepared as possible to win a game like this. So really wouldn't be surprised if it goes either way. Slight lean maybe towards Michigan, but Washington's really defied a lot of the odds most of the season, and wouldn't surprise me if they have another upset to win a national championship.
All right, so just one more thing we wanted to check in with you,
Sure.
Just because you're so plugged in to the college football landscape and not just on the field. So what, if anything, do you think is going to happen to Michigan in the long term regarding penalties or even or a coaching change with Jim Harbaugh, does he try to make another leap to the NFL?
Sure. Well, they've received one of two notice of infraction or notice of allegations rather from the NCAA. So they still have to receive that second notice and ultimately go through the infractions process on both cases. My belief is that penalties would be centered around Jim Harbaugh and the coaches, not so much the team, for those sets of issues. The recruiting violations during COVID is not really a team penalty. I think it's something that could certainly come down. We already have 3-game suspension for Jim Harbaugh that was self-imposed. There could be more coming. I think most people believe that Harbaugh would begin the 2024 season suspended if he's still at Michigan. So that's something to keep in mind. And then as far as the NFL, I think the opportunity is as good as it's ever been for Harbaugh to return to the NFL. You only need one team to say yes. I think there's some really good fits, whether it's the Chargers, whether it's the Raiders, maybe some of the other teams that come open. I think he would be a guy that, given his track record, both at college and the NFL, would come in with true credibility as he comes in the door. So, it's always hard to handicap, and he's a different guy, and an NFL team is going to have to be open to him and his quirks. But I just don't think that there are more qualified candidates for these NFL openings than Jim Harbaugh. So, especially coming off a potential national championship at Michigan.
All right, that was Adam Rittenberg, senior college football writer for ESPN and SiriusXM college sports host. Thanks a lot, Adam.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
The great Adam Rittenberg from ESPN.com joining us to handicap the national championship game. Seemed like a slight lean towards Washington. And I know we didn't touch on this from the beginning, Mo, but I have to go back to our Week 17 podcast because you said you had, quote unquote, a heap on Michigan. So you had to feel a little sweaty in the second half, but at least you came out on top, right?
Definitely wasn't expecting to scoop up my Michigan -3.5 play. I can tell you that much.
I'm glad you did, for your happiness and the sake of your wallet. But any last words, Mo, before we get out of here? If you want to curse out Brad Allen or any other official on the NFL Week 18 slate.
I mean, he did both of us a favor, didn't he? I mean, you have Cowboys division. I have Cowboys to win the Super Bowl. So that helped our EV quite a bit, especially yours, obviously. Yours a lot more than mine. I mean, mine's still, a bit of a dart, but, I did it with a free bet. So whatever, it seems fine. 10-1. I just felt like the Cowboys can definitely beat anybody in the NFC other than the 49ers. And, it's one game, so who knows what can happen. I don't view that as the 49ers are going to be -7.5 or anything. So it's definitely going to be within reason for the Cowboys to win that game if indeed it does happen. So with 10-1, if they were to beat the 49ers, I think we would see them even money at worst, maybe slight underdogs to the Ravens, but anyone else comes out of the AFC, they'll probably be favored. So it's a decent bet, I think. At least it felt like that when I made it, but now it's just they immediately lost a couple games, I think, or at least that Miami game, but I was just trying to buy low, but I guess I could have bought even lower.
And you, speaking of buying low, you have your long shot Bills future at 30-1. They could, believe it or not, they could miss the playoffs. I'm sure you've gone through all the scenarios in your head if they lose, and I think Pittsburgh wins against Baltimore. And I mentioned that spread earlier. Steelers are a 4-point favorite, 3.5, 4-point favorite against the Ravens on Saturday, or they could win the division and push Miami into a wild card spot, which is hard to believe if you go back to earlier in the season when the Dolphins were seemingly a runaway to win the AFC East. My future, though, looking pretty good. Ravens 25-1, already clinching the number 1 overall seed in the AFC and resting Lamar Jackson, the MVP. I also would like to add, Mo, for all your Lamar Jackson slander throughout the season. But any official last words before we say goodbye to our listeners and viewers?
I'll never respect Lamar Jackson the same way I'll never respect Kawhi Leonard. They're both quitters. That's what they are.
That is the definition of Mo Nuwwarah's sports/betting takes. You can follow Mo on X at Mo Nuwwarah with 2 W's. You can follow me at Eli Herskovich. You can follow the lines at The Lines US. And remember to check out our Discord channel. The link is over at thelines.com at the top right-hand corner to get all of our bets for Week 18. You could also head over to BetMGM Sportsbook. If you haven't signed up with BetMGM, one of the best sportsbooks around, not only can you price shop their odds over at thelines.com, but if you aren't part of BetMGM just yet, a user, you can get promo code THELINES, one word, for up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet loses. Remember that bonus bets are not equivalent to real money. Also, head over to play.thelines.com to participate in our free national championship game and NFL Week 18 contest to win Amazon gift cards. So for Mo, myself, Eli Herskovich, thanks for watching and listening to the NFL regular season finale edition of Beat the Closing Number. So long, everybody, and good luck on your bets.